Welcome back to the Tech Talks Daily podcast, where every day we dive into the fascinating world of technology, innovation, cybersecurity, and its impact on businesses and our lives and even world. I'm your host, Neil C. Hughes, and I'm ready to enlighten you with stimulating conversation today with another industry leader. Because in today's episode, I have an influential figure from the cybersecurity domain with us. His name is Raghu Nandakumara, and he's a seasoned expert from Illumio. And Raghu is here to share his insights on where business leaders need to focus their attention to achieve maximum ROI on their cybersecurity investments. So, from discussing the crucial importance of a 6-month payback period to exploring what a good ROI percentage looks like in cybersecurity, we're set for an enlightening dialogue today, which I know is going to provide you all with a lot of value. And we'll also dive into the often unquantifiable benefits, such as growing institutional knowledge, regulatory compliance, etc. And today's guest will also shed light on why organisations often struggle with tracking ROI post-purchase and what they can do about that. And if we've got time, I also want to learn more about the findings unveiled in the Forrester Total Economic Impact of Illumio Zero Trust Segmentation study. I know it's a bit of a mouthful, but there's some pure gold in there. So gear up, listeners, for a deep dive into the intriguing realm of cybersecurity ROI. But to do that, I know you're all located in every corner of the world in 165 different countries. So I'm going to have to ask you to buckle up and hold on tight as I beam your ears all the way to the UK, where Raghu is waiting to speak with us today. So a massive warm welcome to the show. Can you tell everyone listening a little about who you are and what you do?
Sure. Thanks, Neil. Thanks for having me on your podcast. I know I'm sort of guest number 2,700 million or something like that, right? But it's great to be here. So I'm Raghu Nandakumara. I'm Senior Director of Solutions Marketing at Illumio, the Zero Trust segmentation company. And really, in a nutshell, what we do, right, is, as you've seen in the press, right, ransomware incidents, hacking activity, etc., data breaches continue to happen, right? And what we do is we provide our customers a way with which they can better understand sort of what is happening within their environments, right? Endpoint, data center, cloud, and give them ways that they can limit the movement between systems, between resources in their environment. Why is that important? Because attackers leverage a variety of tactics with which to propagate and make an attack successful. Two of these are network discovery and lateral movement. And if you're able to limit the effectiveness of those tactics, you are directly inhibiting the attacker's ability to be successful. And as one of your previous guests, Chase, said on when he spoke to you, it's that it's not about trying to stop an attack. It's trying to make it difficult enough for the attacker that they go and focus on something else, right? So that ultimately is what we do for our customers and hopefully deliver them a better security posture, better cyber resilience. That in my role, my focus is really sort of taking the value proposition of what our product or what our technology does and connecting it to use cases, to business use cases and outcomes that our customers are really looking to achieve.
Big thank you for referencing Chase there. He's been on the show 2 or 3 times now. Incredibly cool guy, isn't he?
He's a fantastic guy, great conversation, and really sort of that whole Dr. Zero Trust character that he's made his own is sort of like a fantastic representation of the cybersecurity profession. So yeah, he's a great guy.
And I also read before you came on the podcast, he's been on your show too. So tell everyone listening a little about your podcast.
Yeah, so this is kind of like the podcast interviewing the podcaster, right? Yeah. Very meta. So Illumio, we've actually just about to wrap season 1 of our podcast, the segment, a Zero Trust Leadership podcast, and where we've had the fortune of having a number of different sort of industry luminaries come and talk to us about their own experiences in cybersecurity and their own thoughts on Zero Trust. And Chase, as Dr. Zero Trust and sort of all the work that he did at Forrester to really push the envelope with Zero Trust that he's done afterwards, he was our first guest. So yeah, I had the pleasure of being entertained by him for that first episode.
Fantastic. And I'm conscious there'll be a few people listening hearing about Illumio for the very first time. So for those people listening, can you just do a bit of an overview of what it is, your role in helping businesses to optimize their cybersecurity investments and all the kind of problems that you're solving for?
Yeah, sure. So Illumio, we're a Bay Area-based late-stage startup, right? We've been in market for about 10 years. And really founded, I'd say in many ways, at the time of founding, the technology was ahead of its time, right? So the co-founders sort of really saw a couple of problems really coming together, right? They saw that the emergence of cloud computing and dynamic computing, right? They saw that problem that within organizations' environments, that once you are on the internal network, so if you think about for many years, and I'm sure listeners, et cetera, will be very aware of things like firewalls, et cetera, that you put on the outside of your network or the edge of your network to essentially keep sort of the untrusted world, right, the bad actors on the outside, and from away from your internal environment where all of your key assets, et cetera, are located. But the problem that they saw was that while that firewalls continued to be an important line of defense, it was still the case that within the confines of your environment, there was freedom of movement, right? So essentially being able to move laterally within the internal network. And this is sort of often how attacks really propagate, right? So the attacker tries, let's say through a phishing attack, tries to get a foothold within your environment because someone clicks on a link they're not meant to, right? That bit of malicious payload gets downloaded and hey, presto, they're on your internal network, right? And then what do? They kind of map out the territory, right? Figure out what's there and then move around, right? Lateral movement. And that ultimately is how sort of the attack spreads. And if you think of something like ransomware, which is often about how do I go and infect as many devices as possible, right? And take potentially as many devices offline or encrypt data as possible, right? Or in the case of, let's say, a very targeted attack, that attacker is then moving step by step within your environment to go and sort of compromise that high value asset, that trophy target, right? So that problem has existed for sort of pretty much since we connected the first two devices onto a network. But as the size of environments has increased, obviously that problem has become exacerbated. And now with things like ransomware attacks very much be part of mainstream, right? Everyone is really aware. So this is we saw these problems, and the reason Illumio was founded was how can we limit the effectiveness of lateral movement, right? Basically giving our customers the ability to put in place those controls, because the fact is, right, is that attackers have a set of tactics. The way they execute those may change, but they have a set of tactics that they go and step through in order to make an attack successful. And if you can hamper their ability to execute one or more of these tactics, right, like discovering the network or like lateral movement, then you have a good chance of making it very difficult for them to go and be successful in that attack. And as we said earlier in the conversation, right, it's not about trying to stop them completely. It's about making it difficult enough that they say, right, this target isn't worth our effort. Let's go and focus on someone else as the target, right? So don't be, essentially, how do you make yourself not the low-hanging fruit, right, for the attacker? So Illumio, really, we deliver two key things for our customers: the ability to be able to understand any connectivity between any two resources in their environment. That could be endpoints that users are using. It could be between workloads in the data center. It could be things in cloud, or it could be now increasingly those other connected devices, these IoT devices that we have that are increasingly connected to our IT infrastructure. So we give them the ability to essentially map all of that out, what is commonly called, let's say, application dependency mapping or asset visibility or flow mapping, whatever your favorite term for that is, right? But understanding those relationships, and then be able to put in place security policies that control access between any pair of resources, so that ideally only access that is actually needed for their function should be possible, right? So this is kind of where the whole sort of zero trust piece comes in, because zero trust is not about no trust, but it's about reducing the amount of implicit trust in an environment, right? So again, attackers always say, okay, well, what can I just leverage to go and move forward. Well, if you give them less to leverage, right, they have to work harder. So that's really what Zero Trust is about. So what we do is that, as I said, right, give our customers the ability to put in place those policies to restrict access between resources, right? So limit that lateral movement. So we're making it harder for that attack to spread. We're containing that spread, right? So ultimately it has the effect of essentially ensuring that rather than having a catastrophic event every time you're breached, you have a minor inconvenience. Ideally, the rest of your organization, the rest of your critical data is safe. You can continue to function. Your cyber resilience is maintained and potentially improved, right? While you go and fix this small problem in one part of your environment, rather than having to essentially take your business offline every time you're hit by some kind of cyber attack. Right. I hope that sort of explains, not necessarily in a nutshell, but really kind of the value that we provide our customers.
It really does. And it also sparked 101 memories listening to you there, because I think it was about 5 years ago. So we're going back a fair way here. But I think I spoke to Andrew Rubin, who was sharing his story about building it. And I think it was a unicorn too, right?
Yeah. Hopefully it's an even bigger unicorn now, right? Yeah. So Andrew's CEO and one of our co-founders. So yeah, and I hope he said the same things that I just said.
Yeah, well, he certainly sparked a few memories. I think it was like 2,000 interviews ago, but it certainly brought a few back there. And I've got to ask though, so much has changed over the last few years. How important is proving ROI in the first 6 months of a cybersecurity investment now? And why is that such a crucial period? Because I think every tech project has almost got there's a close scrutiny on what value it delivers, right?
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. It's even more important now. I mean, I think probably or listeners will have got sort of bored about hearing the term like macroeconomic conditions, ROI, scrutiny on spending, etc. But the reason I think it's important is those factors are of course essential, right? And budgets are constrained, etc. So every investment is sort of additionally scrutinized and questioned and so on. But I think the reason why really buy technology and let's say security technology for two reasons. One is, of course, there is a real sort of, you've done your analysis, right? You've done your modeling and you've identified that, okay, I know that I have this particular gap in my security controls that I must address, right? Yeah. I mean, otherwise, why would you invest in a new security capability, right? So, but also, given that we already have, and even like small size organizations, I'm not even talking about large enterprise here, but even that SMB sort of segment, right, already has a large number of security tools, right, that they've already invested in.
Yeah.
So you're adding one more thing onto that stack. So it's not just about, am I improving my security posture by this new capability that I feel I need, but also how can I rationalize that given that I already have a fairly complex stack, and am I going to get value from it? Am I going to be able to, and the ROI is not just about potentially, is it going to save me money, right? Am I going to be able to essentially take an investment that I've made X and be able to move it to Y, repurpose existing investments? But also is that, can I do this in a way that I'm not going to have to then go and add, right, a whole ton of staff in order to go and run this capability, right? Is it going to add so much complexity that the benefit that it gives from a security perspective, right, is overwhelmed by how difficult it is to operate, right? So those factors are important. And why the 6 month, right, is that particularly now, right, as we move increasingly towards sort of consuming things on a subscription basis, right? And it's really important that if you haven't started to make progress in deploying an investment that you've made, a technology that you've made, right, in those first few months post-purchase, right, it's likely that technology is going to start becoming shelfware, right? Because your focus has then moved on to something else, right? And being able to then essentially build out the program, build out the interest, build out the engagement within your stakeholders, right, is going to be more difficult. So once you've invested, it's important that organizations make that commitment, right? That this is how we're going to build a program out of this. We're going to have the right mandates from sort of top down, right? To say, we've invested in this. This is the reasoning behind it. This is why we need to go and adopt it. There's engagement with all the right stakeholders, so they understand why this is important to them, to their business, and why they need to really support the program. And right, there has been effort to go and deploy the technology, build the processes and the tools to make it consumable, so that organizations can start seeing that progress in those first few months. Because like, I'm a firm believer in taking small steps, measuring that, showing success on that, and then using that as a way to justify taking the next step. And I think, again, why the 6-month timeline is, it feels arbitrary, but why it's important is because it gives you enough time to sort of do that groundwork, but also it also is sufficient time to be able to show sort of some kind of measurable progress. So it's like striking that balance.
And I'm glad to use the word measure there, because of course every business uses that mantra. If you can't measure it, you can't improve it. So
yeah.
In your view, what should a good return investment percentage look like for a business investing in cybersecurity solutions? And how does Illumio compare to the industry averages from what you're seeing out there?
Yeah, I think a lot of these sort of these measures are quite, like, to take them at face value, it's often a bit of a challenge, right? Yeah. I'd say that anything that where you're breaking even, right? It's essentially a zero-sum game, right? Yeah. I think that's a great place. That's a great place to be, right? I think any technology that is able to do better than that, so they're showing a positive return, I mean, is absolutely fantastic. And in the case of Illumio, we actually went out and just recently concluded an exercise where we engaged Forrester Consulting, who are part of the Forrester analyst research firm. We engaged them on what they call a total economic impact assessment of our zero trust segmentation platform, right? And the perspective that they take here is that they sort of understand from the horse's mouth, from us, what our value proposition is, right? How we go to market, how we price our technology, our services, etc., and all those things. They can then go and take a cross-section of our customer base, right? And essentially ask them the same questions, but also understand their own deployment, right? How they have progressed, like what the value they're getting is, etc., right? And also account for like what is the deployment cost of this technology, what is the services cost, support cost, etc. And they and so from that they essentially build that model of benefits and costs, right? And they factor in economic factors, risks, etc., likelihood of success. And what they showed was that the sort of the ROI of leveraging Illumio to do segmentation compared to traditional approaches, so traditional sort of network-based approaches to doing, essentially solving the same problem, is that we delivered ROI of essentially 111%, right? Mm-hmm. So we're better, significantly better, like 11% better than breaking even, right? Which is a really good, I mean, it's a fantastic result. But what it really, from my perspective, what it really highlights is that how we actually make it so much simpler to solve this very real problem for organizations, right? And the reason why is it organizations, given that we knew that this problem existed for so many years, why is it that we weren't able to solve it before? Because the traditional approaches to solving the problem of lateral movement, network discovery, etc., were really expensive and really complicated, right? But we make it simple, we make it less costly, right? And that's proven by, right, the data. It's proven by what the customers are saying. It's proven by what the researchers have found.
And I think it's also important to highlight that there are a lot of less quantifiable benefits investing in cybersecurity. So can you elaborate on some of those and the role of factors like growing institutional knowledge and regulatory compliance benefits? It's often deemed as the unsexy side of this, but it's so important too, right?
Absolutely right. I think that the security benefits, or that grey area of unquantifiables, is where many of us have sort of been talking about the benefits of technologies, right? So I do this better, I do it faster, right? Without having to actually associate a time number to that. But yeah, absolutely. I mean, we've spoken about the security, sort of the direct security benefits, right? Again, sort of repeating myself, restricting the ability to understand for an attacker to be able to map out the network, restricting their ability to move laterally to ultimately limit their success or make it hard and go elsewhere. That ultimately is the key benefit, right? Make it harder, make it significantly harder that they go elsewhere. And interestingly enough, right, even that, we've kind of over the last couple of years, we've worked closely with offensive security experts at Bishop Fox to be able to go and quantify how much harder we make it, right? How much harder segmentation makes it for an attacker to go and progress to their trophy target. How much more effective we make traditional detection response by leveraging our approach, right? So we've really, I think, like when I sort of started at Illumio, right? And I remember going and talking to sort of our CTO at that time and one of the co-founders, PJ. And I said, right, I go to a lot of conferences and I hear vendors say, we do things quicker, better, more secure, etc. right? But then you go and quiz them and say, okay, well, tell me about more secure. How much more secure? And then it's a lot of sort of hand waving, right? And there's no specificity. Why don't we take a different approach? And let's focus on building out a way where we can show how effective we are in real world scenarios, right? Be able to measure that, but then put together the whole documentation about how we did that testing so that customers, prospects can take it, right? They can go and validate themselves. They can build out the same testing and they can say, yeah, okay, this is true or this is false or whatever it may be. So yeah, we've put efforts into that. There's also the compliance angle. I think what we've seen in this shift in regulators, the highly regulated industry, sort of finances really asked this for a while, but we're seeing this catch up in healthcare, in the energy sector. I mean, if we're looking at like Europe specifically, we have things like NIS2, DORA, the Cyber Resiliency Act, right? All of these, which are requesting very specifically, right? You need to better understand what you've got on your network, right? You need to better understand how they're interconnected. You need to be able to control those interactions, right? What does that sound like? It pretty much sounds like the value proposition of what we do as a technology, right? So there are these driving factors that we see, right, that are forcing organizations to go and adopt.
And I think traditionally the C-suite has struggled to see the value in cybersecurity, and many organizations have done a very poor job in tracking ROI on security products post-purchase that would help the C-suite see the value in those products. But I'm curious, is that still the same? Is that changing? What are you seeing at the moment?
So I think there is much better alignment with the C-suite on the security, on sort of the benefits security brings to the business, right? And I think this is really driven by the evolution of that's head of security, CISO, or chief security officer, right? From being just someone who is focused on IT security, right? And hence the disconnect was that I'm just focused on the security of IT as opposed to the security of the business and supporting business outcomes. So I think now what would flip is that the CISO increasingly essentially has a seat at that C-suite table, right? And hence there is a direct line of sight between the business objectives. So the CISO understands what the business objectives are and is building security programs where the outcome of the security programs is connected directly to the business outcomes, right? And that is super, super important, right? Because it then means that also the remainder of the C-suite, the CEO, etc., are more in tune with the benefits the security side of the organization is delivering to help them better achieve their business outcomes, right? And I think cyber resilience and this sort of shift towards focusing on cyber resilience is really a key sort of marker in how it's not just about let me stop an attack or recover from attack. It's how do I build security controls that ensure that even in the midst of a cyber incident, my key business functions can continue to be productive and continue to whatever it's revenue generation or whatever, or supporting my customers, etc., whatever those key things are, right? And I think that's the cyber resilience is that sort of the culmination of the security function and the chief security function, etc., really integrating with sort of the business decision makers, right?
Yeah, love that. And I think for business leaders listening all over the world, they're all, I don't know, trying to do more with less at the moment, and they have to, that big challenge of justifying the spend and getting the budget released of any new tech project. So how should a business approach the process of ROI modeling during that pre-purchase stage, and why is that so important right now?
Yeah, I think you want to go into something with a confidence that you're placing the right bets, right? That there is a limited and ever more so, right? There is a limited sort of pot of money, and you want confidence that you're putting your money in the right places. So I think for security projects, for example, being able to piece together evidence, right, that clearly articulates the benefit that this technology is going to bring, right? The more evidence you have to back that up beyond the obvious security benefits. I think the security benefits should be crystal clear, right? And let's say, for example, you have, say, this is our key business process, right? We've done the threat modeling, we've done the risk modeling. This is where we currently have the risk, and this is what the risk is, right? Here is how this security control will help address that risk, which means that if X should happen, then the likelihood of this being compromised or this being taken down is now reduced by this factor. Okay, so that's your picture, right? Then being able to say, okay, and in order to execute that, this is the technology we've chosen. Why? Because here is the proof that this is going to deliver the outcome that we want, right? And then here is sort of the proof that from a cost perspective, from a complexity perspective, from an operational overhead perspective, that taking this approach to solving this problem is more optimal than taking this other approach to solving this problem, right? Having that body of evidence to really justify the investment puts you in such a better place to be able to convince whoever holds the purse strings that they should place their bets with you versus with something else.
And before you came on the podcast today, I was doing a little research and I came across an interesting study. So can I ask you to share some findings from the Forrester Total Economic Impact of Illumio Zero Trust Segmentation study? And also how Illumio's ZTS platform managed to deliver a total benefit of something like 10.2 million over 3 years. Phenomenal stat, but can you expand on that?
Yeah, I can, right? And I'll try and make it sort of accessible. I mean, the report is there. You can find it on illumio.com for anyone who wants to really go into all the details, right? So this really comes again, and I think we spoke about it briefly earlier, from that combination of like a real 360 review of our entire pre-sales, post-sales, and the customer piece of it, right? So the way it's sort of to summarize it somewhat, right, it's based on sort of understanding like what our like key value proposition is, right? Understanding sort of what our costs are, having those conversations with multiple customers for a range of different size of customers and size of industries. And so for us to then create what they call essentially this model of like an ideal Illumio customer, right? So based on all these conversations, and they then use that to then essentially model out the benefit statements, right? And they look at sort of multiple aspects of benefits, right? They look at the benefit from an efficiency perspective. So you'll see, if you look at the report, there is a section that is dedicated to essentially the operational efficiencies and simplicity delivered by doing segmentation with Illumio, right? There is a section that is focused on the security benefits, right? How much do you avoid in the cost of sort of a data breach, right? With a sort of how much are you reducing your risk exposure by, right? And associating a cost benefit with that. There is the focus on how we improve availability. So if you think about sort of going back to that whole cyber resiliency thing, right? Availability is such an important part now of your cybersecurity outcomes, right? Improving availability, improving uptime. So there's a section specifically on that. So combining all of these benefits, right, we get essentially that sort of the total benefits, which is really where the 10.2 million comes in. And then on the other side, There is sort of what is that for that sort of that typical Illumio customer, this model customer, what their costs are to essentially run that service. So essentially they take the overall benefits, they take those costs, and then they end up with what they call a net present value, which is kind of the overall the sum or the difference of those two, right? And I guess when you do this, right, you hope that the outcome will be positive, so that organizations are actually going to see like they're not going to be spending more, they're actually going to get a return back on it. And then when you work out sort of what is that as a percentage, we find that ours was like, 111%, right? So a very positive ROI.
And based on your extensive experience in the industry and all the conversations you must be having with customers and clients all around the world, to leave everyone listening today, is there any advice you'd give to a business leader listening, looking to maybe maximize the ROI from their cybersecurity investment? I appreciate it's a huge question, but is there any little tip?
Yeah. I mean, what I'll say, right, is that when we look at when we think about cybersecurity and we think about the nature of threats, it's often exciting to go after the new sort of sexy technology, right? Yeah. And I'm sure like there was InfoSec in London in mid-June, right? RSA was in the Bay Area at the tail end of April, all these big conferences. And you'll have seen whatever the latest buzzword is. At the moment, it's like AI, ML, ChatGPT, large language models, yada yada, that stuff, right? And of course, we then tell the conversation as well, what if the attacker has their hands on this? And those are all important conversations to have because those are real, right? And we'll, of course, see increased use of these technologies by both attackers and defenders going forward. However, it's really important, right, to think about the fundamentals, right? And this is kind of going back to, let's say, tactics. The tactics that attackers leverage for an attack to propagate do not change over time, right? The techniques and procedures, the actual way they go and execute those tactics may change, but the tactics don't change. So if you're building defenses, ask yourself, am I addressing these tactics? Am I ensuring that the attacker is unable to successfully execute these tactics? And this, more often than not, boils down to doing the basics really well, right? Basics of security hygiene, because ultimately, when you think about it, right, how is that attacker successful? They're looking to exploit the basic level of human curiosity. Oh, I should click on that phishing link, right? Great, I'm in. I've got my through the front door. The next thing, once they've landed, what do? They look around and say, okay, what is the easy stuff that my target has left lying around that I can exploit, right? Maybe it's an unpatched system, right? They haven't patched a vulnerability. Maybe that the user on that system that they've compromised has too many privileges, right? That they can easily leverage. Maybe it's the fact that they can just move around within that network as freely as they want, right? That they've left all the doors unlocked, right? So these are basics. And whether the attacker is whatever, right? Your future AI, ML, large language model powered super bit of malware, right? Or if it's your basic script kiddie, right, that sort of is just messing around and seeing what they can do, not with any real outcome in mind, right? They're still looking to exploit the same basic things, right? So as defenders, right, make sure that your focus is on those basic tactics that attackers leverage, and your controls are focused on making those as difficult to execute as possible, right? That is what is going to keep you secure in the now and in the future. That really is my stump speech to anyone who wants to listen.
Fantastic advice, an inspirational note to end on, but we're not done yet. Before I let you go, you've shared your invaluable insights today, but I'm now going to ask you to add something to the Tech Talks Daily bookshelf and the Amazon wish list. So if there's one book that has inspired you or means something to you, what would that book be?
I don't read enough books these days, right? Yeah. There's no excuse for that, barring laziness. However, for many years, I have loved reading sports features, right? Yeah. And particularly sort of goes back to sort of reading the Sunday Times Sports Supplement and the Observer Sports Supplement on Sundays, going back many decades. And I love a good sports feature. And I came across a book by the great Ian Wooldridge, who was one of the great writers, not just in British sport, but I think in sport worldwide. And there's a book called Searching for Heroes, 50 Years of Accelerating Sport, of Sporting Encounters, which is a collection of Ian Wooldridge's sort of best bits of sports feature writing, right? And incredible it's his experiences with things like riding the Mille Maglia, having a conversation with luminaries like George Best and Shane Warne and Muhammad Ali, right? So for any lover of sport and just great writing and the ability to really transport you into that event or into the mind of that legend, it's just the best read. And it's something that I've actually gifted to a number of friends, hoping that they'll also be as inspired by it as I am.
Wow, that sounds fantastic. I'm going to be checking that out myself. And I'm conscious we've also mentioned your podcast. We've referred to a report. We've talked about so many different topics today. Where would you like everyone listening to visit to find out more details on anything we talked about and even contact your team? What's the best starting point?
Yeah, I mean, just head over to illumio.com, right? And on there, you can find everything. You can find everything you want to know about sort of zero trust segmentation, about our podcast, about the Forrester TEI, and a whole ton of other great content about sort of this, like essentially how to build better cyber resilience for your organizations.
Well, as I said, we covered so much in a short amount of time here. But the one of the things I really love was where business leaders really need to focus their attention in order to achieve maximum ROI on cybersecurity investments. It's a topic we don't get to talk about very often, and just so glad we were able to hit everything on that today. But thanks for sharing that and having time to leave us with a great book too. But good luck with your podcast, and thanks for joining me today.
Neil, it's been an absolute pleasure to be on the podcast, and looking forward. Hopefully I'll be like Chase, right? I'll be on this every few months, maybe bring some new insights as well.
Yeah, the next one's at 4 a.m. though, okay?
That's all. No, it's 4 a.m. for you as well. So no problem.
Oh, I didn't think that through, did I? Wow, what an enlightening discussion, and what an incredible guy today's guest is. I love conversations like this where I just seem to hit it off with the guest and we have an almost natural rapport. And literally we hit record. We'd never spoke to each other before, and just to hit it off like that is something quite special. And I loved exploring some of the pressing issues today, including the significance of proving ROI within the first 6 months of cybersecurity investments, and also understanding what a good ROI percentage looks like in the industry. And I, for one, learned how it's not just about the numbers, but also the less quantifiable improvements too, such as growing institutional knowledge, the benefits of regulatory compliance. And I think he helped us understand today why organisations often struggle with that post-purchase ROI tracking and how we can rectify that. So I'd like to thank Raghu for sharing such valuable insights, contributing to our understanding of the cybersecurity landscape. And it was a real pleasure having him on the show today. And I think a beautiful friendship was born too. And as for everyone listening, thank you for joining us on this journey. But remember, it's not about me. It's not about today's guest. It's about you listening. And I know each and every one of you will have your own insights and experiences that are also invaluable. So please, I invite you to email me, techblogwriter@outlook.com, Twitter, LinkedIn, Instagram, just @Neil C. Hughes. I'm the easiest guy in the world to find. And I'd love to keep this conversation going with each and every one of you too. But that's it for today's episode. So hopefully you'll join me again tomorrow. But just a big thank you for listening today. And until next time, don't be a stranger.